The defence has finished calling evidence in the trial of the man accused of murdering the British backpacker Ms Millane. Today, the jury in the trial of the 27-year-old accused heard more details about Ms Millane's interest in sex fetishes from men she met online, as well as evidence from a British academic who specialises in sexual culture. The trial is now in its final stages, and our reporter Sarah Robson, who's covering the case, joins me now in the studio. And just a reminder that this conversation will contain some adult themes. Thanks for joining us, Sarah. This expert witness, who was a professor in sex culture, she was the first witness called by the defence today. I mean, what did she tell the court?
So this is Clarissa Smith, who's from the University of Sunderland over in the UK. So she was giving her evidence via AVL. Now, a lot of her work has focused on women's issues in terms of pornography, sexual entertainment and sexual practices. Now, some important context from what we heard yesterday in court. The jury was told that Ms Millane told a friend that she enjoyed rough sex, while we heard from a former sexual partner who had said that he and Ms Millane had researched and experimented with BDSM practices, including choking. Now, Professor Smith talked a lot about the changing attitudes of society towards sex. It's not just for reproduction, sex for pleasure. And she spoke a lot about younger generations having different attitudes to older generations in terms of sex, how open they might be around sharing their sexual preferences, and particularly young women being more assertive about what they want or don't want during sex. Particularly in relation to social media apps like Tinder. And she also spoke a lot about, she was asked a lot by defence lawyer Ron Mansfield around BDSM. So this is stuff like bondage, domination, sexual fetishes. She said BDSM was sort of an umbrella term that encompasses all of these sorts of things. She said that there's been a lot more discussion in recent years about this, some of that because of the erotic novel and the film version of 50 Shades of Grey, and also there's just a lot more discussion about it in the media, and particularly also in women's media. Now, Mr Mansfield asked Professor Smith if asphyxiation could be seen as sort of an aggressive act as part of BDSM. Now, she said that it would be an aggressive act if there was no consent, but that's the same for any sort of sexual practice. And she emphasised that consent and talking to your partner was something that was really crucial, or something that happened a lot amongst people who do practice BDSM. And she also said that young women are, because they are more willing and open to talk about these sorts of things, no one should actually be surprised by that.
Okay. And the jury also heard some evidence from a number of men. Now, one of those men, I believe, met with Ms Millane in person, but others who had basically chatted with her online. So what did the jury hear from them?
Now, all three of these men, they have name suppression and we aren't able to identify them. Now, the first man who was in the witness box actually met Ms Millane in Auckland, and they had sex together the night before she met the man accused of murdering her. They had met at Backpackers and had arranged to get together on this particular night, went back to his apartment, watched a movie, started kissing and ended up having sex. Now, this man said that Ms Millane did not ask him to put his hands around her neck, but he said that is something he might have done anyway, because that was something he usually did during sex because his partners enjoyed it. And when he was asked by Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey if he would describe the sex that he and Ms Millane had had as vanilla, the man responded by saying yes. The next two men the jury heard from had connected with Ms Millane on Whippler. Now, Whippler is an online social network for people interested in BDSM. Now, one of these men was based in the UK, and his statement to the police was read to the court by a defence lawyer, Claire Farquhar.
I can't remember discussing any specific BDSM interests with Grace in detail, but I think she was into Daddy Dom. I think Grace was at an explorative stage and quite open to suggestions. Grace seemed quite keen to know what things were and what sort of things I owned pertaining to BDSM.
Now, this man also commented about how unusual it was that once they moved their chat to a different networking platform, she actually used her full name.
I felt like Grace was more naive and trusting in the BDSM area. When you're using these apps, the users do not have to provide any details at all, so you have to be aware. The users could be any undesirable person online, and Grace seemed to have a naivety.
The jury also heard from another man who was based in Auckland who had also connected with her on Whippler. They'd had a brief chat. He'd made a couple of attempts to call her, but those calls were rejected, and he suspected that he was being rebuffed by Ms Millane.
OK, so the defence, that's all the evidence that the defence is calling now. So what happens next?
So tomorrow morning we will begin the Crown and the defence making their closing addresses to the jury. That's expected to take most of the day tomorrow. And the next step will be on Friday, Justice Simon Moore summing up the case to the jury. And after that, it'll be up to the jury to go out and deliberate on their verdicts.
Thanks, Sarah. Sarah Robson there, who has been covering from the start the jury trial of the 27-year-old who is accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane.